Picture this scenario, right? You've got an IT technician, it's a Friday afternoon, and they are just tasked with wiping a departed employee's laptop.
Yeah, super standard task.
Right, totally mundane. So they go into the control panel, they find the security software, and they click uninstall. Now, normally a progress bar appears, the app vanishes, and they go home. But this time, the software actively fights back.
It refuses to leave.
Exactly. It refuses to leave the machine. It demands this cryptographically secure, time-sensitive token that the technician just doesn't have. I mean, it almost feels like the software itself is acting like a stubborn piece of malware, holding on to the operating system for dear life.
The irony there is that the friction causing that technician so much frustration is the exact mechanism keeping the entire corporate network from being dismantled by a real threat actor.
Oh, for sure.
We often expect software to be, subservient to the person holding the physical device. But in the realm of enterprise cybersecurity, that dynamic is completely inverted. The software does not trust the user, and it certainly does not trust local administrator privileges.
Welcome to the deep dive. For you listening today, the learner, whether you are actively prepping for the CCFA exam, which is the CrowdStrike Certified Falcon Administrator credential, or you're just deeply curious about how global security operations centers manage 50,000 endpoints without breaking a sweat, you are in the right place.
We're getting into a really critical area of enterprise architecture today.
Yeah, we are unpacking CCFA Domain 2, which covers sensor deployment. We're going to track the entire life cycle of a security agent, from getting the sensor installed to keeping it communicating, what happens when it goes dark, and finally, that vault-like security required to uninstall it.
To really grasp how this works, we have to throw away the consumer model of software entirely. I mean, when you install an antivirus on your home computer, it's a standalone entity.
Right, you just double-click an installer file.
Exactly. It lives on your hard drive, it updates when you tell it to, and you are the master of it. But an enterprise sensor is fundamentally different. It's just a single node in this massive interconnected nervous system.
So the deployment is less about installing an app and more about, well, performing surgery on the OS. Let's start before the software even touches the machine. We need a blueprint. If I'm an admin rolling this out, what are the absolute prerequisites? Because the sources emphasize that missing a step here tanks the whole install.
Compatibility is your first major hurdle. You cannot just push this sensor out blindly. Admins have to painstakingly verify the OS and specific kernel versions against CrowdStrike's deployment guides.
I assume it needs some pretty deep hooks to monitor behavior.
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at Windows, for instance. The sensor relies on specific native system services to function. Like if an overzealous IT admin disabled the base filtering engine to save a few megabytes of RAM.
Oh, people do that all the time on older machines.
Yeah, they do. But if that engine is off, the installation will fail outright. The sensor needs those fundamental hooks to inspect network traffic.
That presents a fascinating fragility, you know? A random Windows service being turned off by someone trying to optimize a laptop can bring a massive enterprise security deployment to a grinding halt on that endpoint.
It really highlights the deep dependency between the security tool and the native OS architecture. And this dependency becomes even more pronounced when we look at Apple environments.
Mac deployments are notoriously tricky.
Oh, yeah. With Mac OS, you can't simply download a package and run it. You are entirely reliant on Modal Device Management, or MDM, to lay the groundwork.
Let me pause you there, because the requirement for an MDM feels like massive administrative overhead. Why can't the sensor just pop up a little window asking the user, hey, do you grant this app permission to view your files like every other Mac app does?
That approach completely fails at an enterprise scale. I mean, for two reasons. First, you cannot rely on an employee to click allow on a scary-looking system prompt.
Right. If they click deny, that endpoint is now a massive blind spot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And second, Apple has aggressively shifted towards a sealed operating system architecture, specifically system integrity protection. To do its job, the Falcon sensor needs full disk access, system extensions, and network filter extensions.
It basically needs the keys to the entire kingdom.
It does, and Apple's architecture requires those keys to be granted by a trusted, centralized authority.
Meaning the MDM.
Right. The MDM has to push down configuration profiles that tell the Mac, look, when you see this specific piece of CrowdStrike software arrive, grant it root-level access immediately without asking the user.
Wow. And if you skip that MDM step,
The Apple OS will essentially quarantine the sensor. I mean, it'll be installed, but it'll be completely powerless.
Okay, so assuming we have our MDM profiles in place and our Windows-based filtering engines are running, we are ready to actually deploy. And here's a detail from the sources that feels almost magical in the IT world. No reboot is required.
The rebootless install is a massive architectural achievement. Historically, anything that hooked into the kernel of an OS required a full system restart to initialize.
I think about the logistical nightmare of that. If you are deploying to 50,000 machines, you might be dealing with a hospital network where a machine is monitoring patient data.
Or a financial trading floor where a reboot could cost millions of dollars in interrupted trades.
Exactly. But this just installs and starts working.
Yeah, the sensor is designed to be incredibly lightweight and hook into the operating system dynamically. The second the installation command finishes, the sensor is alive. It injects itself into the necessary processes and protects the machine immediately.
No interruption to the end-user workflow at all, but for it to protect the machine, it has to know who it works for. It needs its orders. Which brings us to a concept the sources emphasize heavily, the CID.
The customer ID, yes.
I visualize the CID as a unique DNA swab. It proves this newly spun up laptop belongs to your specific corporate family tree.
A DNA swab is an excellent way to think about it. Technically, it's a 32-character hexadecimal string, and it is the most critical parameter in the entire installation command.
So you have to feed it to the installer.
Right. During deployment, the installer must be fed this exact string. The CID acts as the anchor, tethering this isolated laptop to your specific Falcon tenant in the cloud.
So what happens if an admin makes a typo in that massive 32-character string? Or, say, they use an old deployment script by accident?
The installation just fails, and the system throws a specific flag. Often, an incorrect CID or an expired deployment token will throw error 1244.
Error 1244, okay.
And even if it manages to install, but completely fails to communicate with the cloud to receive its unique agent ID, its aid, you'll see error 1232.
The CID is what guarantees the endpoint actually gets the right prevention policies wrong.
Exactly. And it ensures the telemetry reports to your dashboard rather than just disappearing into the ether.
Okay, so we have this sensor installed. No reboot forced. It knows its CID, so it knows who its boss is. But at this exact moment, it is still isolated. It has to send all that behavioral telemetry back to the cloud to be analyzed.
Right, it needs a comm channel.
Let's unpack that. How does a sensor securely phone home across a chaotic corporate network?
The networking architecture is surprisingly streamlined. The sensor strictly uses port 443 over TLS. That handles both incoming policy updates and outgoing telemetry.
Port 443. But the vital detail here is that all communication is initiated outbound to the CrowdStrike cloud.
Yes, entirely outbound.
I want to make sure I understand the gravity of that. Initiating purely outbound communication means the IT department does not have to open any inbound ports on their perimeter firewalls.
That is a fundamental relief for any security team. Opening inbound ports is essentially poking holes in your fortress walls and hoping only the good guys walk through.
Yeah, that sounds
Right, so by making the sensor reach out to pull down instructions, the perimeter remains sealed. However, in highly restricted environments like military contractors or big banks, outbound internet access is usually blocked by default.
So what do?
Admins must explicitly whitelist specific CrowdStrike Cloud fully qualified domain names, or FQDNs, along with specific IP addresses.
Okay, and this introduces a fascinating conflict, something the sources highlight as a major cause of connection failure. It involves deep packet inspection, or DPI. Let's break down why an organization's own network would suddenly start choking its own security sensor.
We have to look at why DPI exists in the first place. A corporate network wants to ensure employees aren't leaking proprietary data or downloading malware over encrypted channels, right?
Right.
So the network uses a proxy server to perform deep packet inspection. The proxy acts as a middleman. When an employee connects to a website, the proxy intercepts the traffic, decrypts it, inspects the contents for threats, re-encrypts it with its own corporate certificate, and sends it on its way.
It's the digital equivalent of the post office opening your sealed mail, reading it to make sure you aren't mailing contraband, putting it into a brand new envelope, forging your signature, and delivering it.
That is a perfect parallel. And for a standard web browser, that process is seamless.
Because the corporate IT team already installed their forged signature, their root certificate, on the employee's browser, so the browser trusts the new envelope.
Exactly. But the Falcon sensor is not a standard web browser. It utilizes strict certificate pinning.
Meaning, the sensor is hard-coded to only accept the original, genuine signature. It expects to see the specific GoDaddy root certificate directly from the CrowdStrike cloud.
Yes. The sensor initiates its secure TLS handshake, reaches out to the cloud, and instead of getting the CrowdStrike certificate back, it gets the corporate firewall's proxy certificate.
And the sensor immediately recognizes that the traffic is being intercepted.
Instantly.
Wait, so our own corporate firewall's deep packet inspection is basically acting like a hacker trying to intercept the traffic, like a sanctioned man-in-the-middle attack.
A well-intentioned one, but an attack nonetheless. And the sensor is built to be paranoid, so it just aggressively defends itself.
It's pure friendly fire.
It really is. But we have to consider why certificate pinning is non-negotiable for high-assurance security tools. The sensor must guarantee, without a shadow of a doubt, that it is receiving its policy updates directly from the genuine cloud console.
Because if it blindly accepted any certificate, a real threat actor could intercept the traffic, spoof the cloud, and push a policy telling the sensor to just shut itself down.
Or ignore a piece of ransomware entirely. So to protect the integrity of its mission, the sensor intentionally shuts down its own connection rather than risk-taking orders from an imposter.
It prefers to be isolated rather than compromised. So how does a network team resolve this standoff?
It requires a strict network bypass. The network admins have to configure their proxies and firewalls to exempt CrowdStrike traffic entirely.
They essentially tell the DPI engine, hey, when you see traffic heading to these specific CrowdStrike FQDNs, do not decrypt it. Let the original envelope pass through untouched. But what happens when that bypass fails? Or consider a different scenario. A laptop is thrown in a desk drawer for a month while an employee is on leave, completely cut off from the network.
Or, as we discussed with Apple, a user upgrades their Mac to a brand new OS kernel before the sensor officially supports it.
Right. When a sensor loses its connection to the brain or loses its core OS hooks, what is its failsafe? It doesn't just panic and crash the machine, right?
No, and that brings us to a critical operational state known as RFM, or reduced functionality mode.
RFM.
Yeah, it's the ultimate safety net. It triggers under a few specific conditions, like if the sensor cannot communicate with the cloud for an extended period, which is typically 14 days.
Okay, 14 days.
It also triggers due to an OS or kernel mismatch, or if those essential macOS MDM permissions somehow get revoked.
I keep picturing a submarine that has lost radio contact with Surface Command. The captain knows they're alone in hostile territory. They don't have fresh orders, so the submarine goes into survival mode. It focuses entirely on maintaining life support to keep the crew safe, but it abandons its main offensive mission. It refuses to launch torpedoes based on intelligence that might be weeks out of date.
That analogy captures the design philosophy perfectly. In reduced functionality mode, the sensor significantly scales back its resource consumption.
It stocks aggressive monitoring.
Yeah, it stops trying to monitor every single micro behavior because, well, can't upload that telemetry to the cloud's AI for analysis anyway. It drops down to providing only minimal safe mode protection.
To understand why this is such a brilliant design choice, we should look back at the history of endpoint security. Because there was a time when a disconnected antivirus was a massive liability to the host machine.
Oh, older legacy systems were notorious for this. If they lost network connectivity or encountered an unexpected kernel change, they would often just panic.
They just spin out of control.
Exactly. The software would enter an infinite loop, endlessly trying to phone home. It would eat up 100% of a computer's CPU and completely crash the machine with a blue screen of death.
It prioritized its own aggressive scanning over the operability of the computer it was supposed to protect.
Which is terrible for business. RFM proves that a mature security tool fundamentally prioritizes the business's operational stability. It accepts its own blindness to ensure the employee can at least continue using Microsoft Word or presenting their slide deck without the machine melting down.
It's a graceful degradation of service. But, I mean, from an administrative perspective, a fleet of submarines operating in survival mode is a massive vulnerability. You have endpoints that are functionally blind to modern threats.
They are.
So how does an administrator actually find these machines? If I am staring at a console responsible for 50,000 endpoints, how do I locate the few dozen laptops that have quietly slipped into RFM?
The platform uses a highly specific querying system. Administrators navigate to the host management page and use the Falcon query language, or FQL.
And what's the query?
By applying the simple filter status : RFM quote, the console instantly aggregates every single host that requires intervention.
That cuts right through the noise.
Yeah, so the IT team can figure out if a network bypass broke, an OS needs rolling back, or a laptop just needs to be plugged back into the internet.
That brings us to the end of the line. The life cycle of the sensor eventually requires uninstallation. whether a machine is being retired, repurposed for a new hire, or completely wiped.
Right. Going back to the intro.
Yeah, let's return to the IT technician frustrated by an app that refuses to be uninstalled. If this sensor is engineered to survive corporate man-in-the-middle attacks and retreat safely into RFM, it is definitely not going to let a user click a friendly remove button.
Uninstallation is treated as a highly privileged vault-like operation. It is controlled by the uninstall and maintenance protection setting within the sensor update policies.
And in the default catch-all policy, this protection is enabled from day one, right?
Yes. And when this is enabled, simply having local administrator rights on the Windows or Mac machine is not enough. Attempting to uninstall, repair, or even temporarily stop the Falcon service locally requires a maintenance token.
And the sources detail that this isn't just a static password an IT team can write on a whiteboard in the office.
No, absolutely not. It is a unique, cryptographically secure, time-limited token. The only way to obtain it is for an authorized security admin to actively log into the centralized Falcon console, locate that specific host, and generate the token.
And the execution of this token is equally rigid. I mean, there is no graphical user interface where you just paste the token into a text box.
Right. It is entirely command line driven.
Mm-hmm.
This is because enterprise uninstallation is usually handled by mass deployment tools like Microsoft SCCM or Intune, which operate silently in the background.
So on a Windows machine, for example, the technician has to run a script.
They have to run an MSI execution with a specific flag. They would type /QN, which tells the installer to run quietly with no UI, followed by maintenance token equals, and then paste that massive string they retrieved from the console.
I look at that process, and the friction is undeniable. A tech just trying to fix a broken laptop has to stop what they're doing, ping a higher-tier security admin, wait for them to generate a temporary passcode, and execute a command line script just to remove an app. It feels like layers of unnecessary bureaucracy.
It feels like it, yeah. But it is entirely intentional bureaucracy, driven by a specific threat model. We have to ask, who benefits if uninstallation is frictionless?
Malware, I guess.
Exactly. If a help desk technician can easily turn off the security agent with a few clicks, then a piece of malware can be written to execute those exact same clicks. Or worse, a malicious insider with local admin rights could quietly disable the agent before exfiltrating data.
Ah, I see. It creates a physical and cryptographic separation of privileges.
Precisely. Even if an adversary compromises a laptop, steals the local administrator password, and owns the machine entirely, they still cannot turn off the burglar alarm.
Because they hit a brick wall?
Right, because they do not have access to the cloud console to generate that time-sensitive token. The friction you feel is the exact friction stopping an attack.
Now, the sources do mention a concession for large-scale IT operations. A bulk maintenance mode token. I mean, if I am refreshing an entire department of 500 laptops, generating 500 individual tokens would bring the IT department to a standstill.
The bulk token exists, yes. It applies across an entire policy rather than a single host. But the documentation attaches a stark warning to this feature.
It's basically a skeleton key, isn't it?
It is a skeleton key. It should never be handed directly to end users or broadly distributed.
Yeah.
If that bulk token leaks, any person or any malware can disable the sensor on any machine operating under that policy until the token finally expires or is manually revoked.
Wow. Well, we have tracked the full life cycle of this deployment. Let's recap this journey for you, the learner. We started with the blueprints, verifying OS kernels and understanding why Apple's sealed architecture makes MDM mandatory to grant root-level access. We explored the unique DNA swab, the 32-character CID, which acts as the mandatory anchor linking the endpoint to the cloud tenant without ever forcing a system reboot.
We then navigated the communication pathways, specifically the requirement for port 443 outbound over TLS.
And we unpacked the mechanics of deep packet inspection, detailing why the sensor uses strict certificate pinning to defend against corporate proxies, and why network teams must implement a bypass to prevent that friendly fire.
Then we analyzed reduced functionality mode, that submarine failsafe. We saw how the sensor prioritizes host stability over aggressive scanning when it loses contact with the cloud, completely avoiding the blue screens of older legacy systems.
And finally, we arrived at the vault door, the command line execution of a time-limited maintenance token, ensuring that uninstallation requires cloud-level authority, not just local admin rights.
Mastering these distinct mechanisms from error 1244s to DPI clashes in RFM states is absolutely crucial for the CCFA exam. But more importantly, it shifts your perspective on enterprise architecture.
It really does. You stop seeing endpoints as isolated consumer devices and start viewing them as deeply integrated, heavily defended nodes in a broader zero trust network.
It reframes the entire concept of software ownership.
And that leaves me with a final thought for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. We have explored how enterprise security software has to embed itself so deeply into an operating system, using aggressive tactics like certificate pinning to reject its own network infrastructure and cryptographic maintenance tokens to defend itself against the very administrators who own the hardware.
It's a total paradigm shift.
It raises a philosophical question about the future of technology. As threats become more sophisticated, where exactly do we draw the line between software that serves the user and software that must inherently distrust the machine it lives on? The next time you find yourself frustrated by an app that refuses to be uninstalled, consider that sometimes that intentional friction is the only thing standing between a compromised laptop and a total corporate breach.